Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Yes, still in the makeshift setup. Yes, still exceedingly little progress on my end of things. In fact, close to no progress. But enough about me and any updates on my end. Tom was away last week, forced to evacuate for Hurricane Ian. So naturally, we want to welcome Tom back. We want to thank Lee Overstreet for pinch hitting for us, filling in.
I
while
never
Tom
approved that, by the way. No
was
one ever
away.
ran that past me.
Yes, we didn't bother to ask. It's happened in the
No,
past.
just I was just informed that Lee would be filling in for me. I didn't realize that
That's right.
I was so expendable. Anyways,
But we want to ask, how is Tom's family? How is Tom? How is your house? And how is your freshly painted gray theater? Did everybody make it?
yes. So it is there's a lot of people out there right now making jokes about, especially in Florida, about Hurricane Ian, because it was forecasted to go one direction and it changed, and
Right.
all the people who were in the line of Ian, which was me, like we were dead center.
Yeah,
and
it was
my
supposed
house,
to be west coast of Florida, hit
Yeah.
hard.
well, in the Tampa area, and
Sure.
it was like forecast to go directly over the top of my house. And I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you, everything that you're seeing out of Sanibel Island and all that stuff down there, all of that would have been my house. Like my house would have washed away. There is
Yeah.
there's no doubt about that. Like I had kissed all of this goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I took a video of all the equipment that was in the home theater, took a picture of, took a little tour of the house, took pictures from the outside, had the kids take pictures of their rooms, had my wife do some stuff. She had to stay in town because she works for the city,
Okay.
and she needed to be on call. But I evacuated again. The last time I evacuated was Irma, and we evacuated to Clint's house, which is in Lakeland. And Irma moved from the track, which was going to hit our house here again, to hitting Lakeland. And this time I went to Lakeland, and it actually missed me again, but it went further to the other side. So we were extremely lucky. I cannot express, like, I'm looking at these pictures down at Sanibel Island and everything that's gone on down there, and I'm like, that was 100% going to be us.
Wow.
That there's just no doubt in my mind. So
So, I mean, just
when
to make
I
it all
say-
clear, as evidence, Tom is here. I can see him on Skype. Unfortunately, nobody else can on the YouTube video because it's all still makeshift over here.
Yeah.
But he is sitting in his theater with his
That's
screen
right.
behind him that as evidence that his house still stands and even his home theater survived.
Instead of the water being pushed into Tampa Bay and into my house, which is what happened down south, because of the side of the hurricane that we were on, it actually sucked all the water out of Tampa Bay. So all the water that like people who stayed behind, which was not us, people who stayed behind, they were actually able to go and walk on parts of the seabed that no one's seen or no one's been in years. And the real shame of the whole thing is we were given many days warnings, like,
Sure.
to that we were going to be evacuated, that we needed to leave, and everybody was preparing and everything else. And then at the last minute, it turned, and all of us were like, woohoo, we did all this for nothing. We're going back home. And a lot of people did. They just turned right around and came right back home. I stayed because it was just too much for
Which,
production.
by the
for us
way,
to-
I would much rather evacuate and not have had to.
That's right. But all of the people down south that did get hit, they got very little evacuation
because it
warning.
changed the
Because it
forecast
changed
where
at
it
the
was
last
going.
minute. So people are like, I can't believe people are parked their cars there, or people have, didn't move or didn't prepare. I'm like, they had no time. They had none. Like the roads were packed. People were, scrambling to get, ice and food and get their houses ready in ways that they weren't prepared to. Like, my house was, we don't have boards for the windows, but we had all the the sandbags up and the tarps and everything else. We were very fortunate. We had a very, very large limb come out of a very, very big tree, but it didn't hit the house. It went through with a fence and into the backyard, and it was a big pain. Like, I did a year's worth of yard work in 4 days, but and I think grand total, in order to get all that back up and running, we were at like $1,000. Which, of course, insurance is not going to cover that, but I wouldn't even make a claim.
But I mean, for all things considered, you'd much rather have that be the situation.
Yes. Yes. So we are very fortunate. Thank you for all of you that I know were, sending good thoughts and all that stuff my way. I know that there's a lot of people in my area that are very, very grateful that this thing turned, because we can't help but look and see what happened down there and know without a shadow of a doubt that should have been us. So we definitely dodged a bullet on that one. If you are down south, if you have family down south, there's a lot of people in my area, including me, who are sending supplies and money and anything that we can do. There's a person in my neighborhood who's collecting. A lot of people went out and bought generators. If you wanted to go to Home Depot, you'll see a line of people trying to return them because they went out, they bought them, and Home Depot's like, they have all these rules now about that because people like run them for a day and then like, I don't need this anymore, and put it back in the box. So yeah, it was fine. So we evacuated to Clint's house. I got to watch Thor: Love and Thunder again in his theater as opposed to mine, which was an interesting experience because we talk a lot about how do you know that you've got good bass, or how do you know that you have got good frequency response and all that stuff. And sitting in somebody else's theater, which is tuned to their liking or tuned to their room, being able to listen to that and go, okay, like this is different. This is not the same as my room. And in some ways I like it a little bit better, and in some ways I like it a little bit less. And I'm starting to discern the difference between those two things because, when was the last time I was in somebody else's home theater, and heard something? It's been a really long time. So it was very, very interesting for me. So I could talk about this stuff all day, but I also, the day we evacuated, I got my glasses, so now I'm wearing my glasses, which cleaned. Which
get used to that, man. That's part of the fun of wearing glasses on a regular basis. The smudge.
Yeah, so I'm. Yes, there's just a lot of stuff going on all at the same time.
Yowza.
When the fence went down, the dogs had no place to go, and they were going crazy. My little dog can't stand noises, like really, stuff like that. So she didn't want to go outside in the rain. She doesn't like to get wet either. She didn't want to go outside in the rain. She didn't want to go outside in the wind. She didn't want to go outside in the storm. She didn't want. I was like taking her. I had to pick her up and like throw her outside so that she would go to the bathroom. I'm like, go to the bathroom, dog. You're killing me. My wife's like, I think she doesn't feel well. She went to the bathroom and I saw a little bit of blood. I'm like, yeah, she's a mess. Give her about 36 hours to figure this whole thing out. The big dog didn't care. he just like, is something going on I should know about? Because she seems really freaked out. But yes, we were very fortunate. I feel very, very lucky. It was very scary for all of us. And again, my heart goes out to those that are south of us that are suffering right now, because I see.
Well, I mean, to keep that in mind, like anybody who's listening and hearing and going, "Oh, okay, that's good." Tom came away from it really relatively unscathed, all things considered. But that doesn't mean Florida escaped the hurricane as an entire state.
This was a bad
any
one.
Means.
This was a real bad one.
Yeah.
I mean, this one hit hard. And the real bad part, as bad as, it's one thing to have a really strong hurricane come through. It's a completely other thing to have a really strong hurricane come through slowly. And that thing was moving at like 8 miles an hour when it came through.
The winds were not the
No. But the storm itself, it
just
sat.
Right.
If you remember a couple of years ago, Houston got absolutely killed by a storm, and it wasn't that the storm was. I mean, I don't remember what the exactly the thing, but it sat there for so long, and that's what really got them.
Yeah.
So between the Category 4 hurricane that smacked into Florida, the fact that it was going slow and just sat there and just churned and churned and churned is just nuts. So yeah, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but believe me, everybody around here, like, we're all like nervously, trying to be like humble about how happy we are that
it's relief, right? It's very understandable relief.
You feel like you don't want to celebrate too much because people are suffering, number one, but number two, you almost are like, don't tempt anything. I don't know what's up there looking at us, because that thing moved at the last minute, and the collective sigh of relief, at least in my family, was pretty audible. We were thrilled and that happened, but again, certainly not because we certainly didn't wish ill upon anybody
Well, yeah,
else.
and I mean,
Let's
being in Florida, this is not the last storm that'll ever hit. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. I was prepared, though. I was absolutely prepared to come back here and just be like, okay, well, they're going to bulldoze the house,
right,
and I'm going to live in an Airbnb someplace else, or we're just going to move or something as they rebuild. Because I don't really feel like a storm of that magnitude hitting my house or this area, there's going to be anything left. I think there's even the houses that have been built recently. My house is older; it's from the 50s. Even the houses that were built recently to code, where everything's much higher and everything else, I just don't see them surviving something like that. It's just too much. The water, 14-foot storm surge is not something that, I mean, any house is really built to withstand for any length of time. So it was a thing, man. It was a thing.
Well,
it was a thing.
We'll thank our lucky stars for the moment. Everybody is welcoming Tom back, and we can talk about a little bit about what we watched. You've got something written down here that you watched. I'll just mention.
I did.
I have started watching the new version of Quantum Leap. There's
a new version of Quantum Leap?
There is a reboot version. I mean, they reference the original version, so that's not.
Where is
a bit of a sequel. It's
Is
on
it?
network TV, and oh boy, is it a return to network TV. Yeah, that's sort of my comment about it. It's like, yeah, we're going to do all the exposition. We're going to have the characters say all the things about their relationships to the guy who just showed up, who they're supposed to know, because it's the whole thing of, like, his consciousness gets leapt into people in the past. So he looks like them to everyone else, but he's got his mind that's gone into them, and like all these people that have known this person they're looking at, who doesn't look any different to them, and known them for years, and they're doing whatever it is they're doing that he's supposed to fix, they're going to give all the exposition. So yes, wonderful return to network TV. I'm enjoying it on that level, because honestly, it's like a perfectly fine show. It's just humorous because I've gotten used to much more prestige television and streaming television where everything is serialized. It's like, oh man, this is a throwback to the classic network TV type of writing. So I'm kind of enjoying it on that level. So if you want something that is easy to digest and watch and you really don't have to think too hard about, Quantum Leap is just fine. It's probably going to get canceled. Its ratings are horrible.
Literally one of my parents' favorite shows of all time.
Oh, the Scott Bakula version?
The Scott Bakula version.
Yep.
Absolutely love that show. So I haven't heard them talking about it. They may not know about it. I'll mention it to them. So if you don't know, on Disney Plus, Hocus Pocus 2 was released.
Right.
And I hadn't seen Hocus Pocus since it came out in 1993. If I even saw it then, to be honest with you, I really feel like I didn't, because I graduated from high school in 1990. So I really don't feel like I might have seen this thing at all. But I saw it, and first of all, PG is much different these days. There was like I had to explain to what my 13-year-old son was. I had to explain to him what a virgin was, because they kept saying the word over and over again. I was like, not something that just comes up in common parlance these days. And the trope of having everybody be a bully is not one I really liked to begin with. But when you see these older movies, you're just like, my God, they really felt like everybody was a sociopath. And I mean, they may have been back then, but I don't remember everybody being a sociopath. So didn't love it. But my 13-year-old son could not stop laughing.
Okay.
Thought it was hilarious the entire time.
Now, this was the original Hocus Pocus that
the
you
original,
just watched.
That's right. Sarah Jessica Parker, Bette Midler, and the other one.
Yeah. Now, they've brought everybody back, didn't they?
Yes,
for the sequel?
they did.
So they actually brought back the actors from the first one. Okay, that'll be interesting.
Well, it's fine, because they're supposed to be old witches who are trying to get their youth back by eating the souls of children. It's like sort of the whole deal. So there's no reason why they can't look old. I mean, that's part of the deal. So I haven't seen the second one yet because my son's had too much homework. So the 13-year-old is, and we'll probably watch it this weekend, but we'll see.
Okay.
I had also watched the first 3 episodes of Andor.
Okay.
Which I absolutely loved.
All right.
I will tell you, there is a reason They released 3 episodes at once. Like when I saw that, I was like, 3 episodes at once? Why?
Yeah,
you know
I said
why?
that last week.
Because you're gonna be freaking confused. That's why.
Because I had only watched episode 1 last week, which is still the case. I haven't caught up on the. There's 3 more now. They're up to episode 4. So yeah, I was like, okay, for like strictly from episode 1 all by itself, I have not connected yet. But I had heard from everywhere that yes, you kind of need to watch all 3 together.
My son and I looked at each other. My 13-year-old son and I, we're the ones watching it together. We looked at each other at the end of the first episode, and we went, I have no idea what's going on in this show, do you? And I'd be like, none. No idea. So, yes, it takes a good, 90 minutes to get into this thing because, or if not more, because, I'm really curious as to why they paced it in such a way. It's not bad. I really do like it. I like it, I think, even more because so far it hasn't been like a, like a cameo fest.
Okay.
It's, you know what I mean? It's just sort of him doing his thing. So I do like it. We'll see where it goes. I have not seen the 4th episode yet, so I'm excited to see where it goes. Still liking She-Hulk. Still think that the format really works. And I'm kind of realizing that it is the first time that we're seeing a character, outside of maybe like the Spider-Man movies, where a character who is getting their powers and then going, this kind of sucks. This is not all it's cracked up to be. Like, I thought this was going to be awesome, and it is sort of awesome, but it also kind of sucks. So I like that aspect of it quite a bit. It's giving me these sort of coming of age vibes, but she's, obviously, her trying to balance her work and her social life, and then adding on to it the superhero or the superpower aspect of it. It's just, I find it to be, it's light enough that you can just kind of enjoy it and watch it for the silly stuff that goes on, but it's also got enough of that kind of through line going through that if you want to pay attention to it, it really does have something to say. I like where it's going. So if you're not liking She-Hulk because the CGI is sort of mediocre,
a little ropey.
Hey man, you do it. That's what I got to say about that.
Well, I only want good things for Tatiana Maslany, so I'll be a fan no matter what.
I will tell you, I think after this, my wife is probably going to want to watch anything that she's in.
Okay.
I'll tell you that.
Go watch Orphan Black. Hooray, finally.
I can't find it. It's not on any free of the streaming services.
It's
I did
Crave
sign up
up here in Canada, but no.
I signed up for Tubi, which is a free ad-supported whatever, because it had a movie on there. I want to see a horror movie. And it's October. So we will. I will report on how I like that later on once I watch it. Let's get talk about this podcast. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com. You can find our our current and older episodes, including show notes and Flickr albums, where you can follow along with the pictures that we are talking about. For the most part, I think so. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where sometimes you can see our faces, not now.
It's been a
but
while.
You will be able to see
forget.
those images. Yeah, it will be. I don't know that we ever have to go back to showing our faces.
Yeah. Hey, people want to see the glasses, Tom. They got to at least give them that at some point.
I take a picture and they could put that in the Flickr album.
We'll just make that our.
I'll do it. Hey, maybe I'll do a thirst trap on TikTok.
There you go. We'll just make your face with glasses on the thumbnail from now on, forever and ever.
Okay, let's not do that. You want to contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter's @avrant_Tom. Let's talk about our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, all you have to do is support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and that will take you to a PayPal donation site. So we want to thank Julian for doing that. I think he actually did it yesterday. So
okay.
Yes. Julian, thank you very much.
Yeah, I had said to Lee last week, I wasn't sure if anything came in last week because I don't see the PayPal direct donations, but there we go. That's the answer to that. We didn't miss anybody. And Julian, thank you very much for your PayPal donation this week.
We also want to thank our 137 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you can sign up to have a monthly contribution given to us from your account. Think of it as a subscribing member.
Yeah.
Podcast supporter. So we have 137 patrons, including Bertrand. So thank you to all of you.
Yes, indeed. That is patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, a voluntary subscription, if you please. So a big, big thank you to our 137 patrons over there for the financial support. Bertrand, thank you for being one of them.
All right. If you can't support us financially, we understand. Just support us in some way and let us know what you did so we can mention you here. Julian called AV Science to order a JVC projector, which he says was well worth a phone call, and let them know he heard about them from us. Yeah, calling them saves you money.
That is what we have heard through the grapevine. Yes, a little birdie has told us. So thank you, Julian, for mentioning us to them. They were pleased to hear it, he said.
Yeah. Greg was in Vancouver for a conference and treated Rob to dinner.
He
Good
did.
for you, Rob.
Thank you, Greg.
So I don't know what any of this means.
Well, I just wanted to mention, Greg is a PhD. He works over at Indiana University. So he is working on socio-neural physiology, which is quite a mouthful, but neurophysiology, of course, is like our autonomic systems that are going on there, the physiology of our nervous system, and then it is like the social and socio responses, so like both the neurophysiological responses to social stimuli and then the social reactions to neurophysiology. So he's studying all of that. He is an assistant professor, a director of undergraduate studies, an assistant research scientist. He's developing contact and non-contact sensors to collect this neurophysiological data. So yeah, really, really smart guy. We got along really, really well. We had very sort of similar personalities and political takes and all that. So honestly, we thought we would focus on talking about home theater. We barely talked about home theater at all, and as a result, there's a question from Greg at the end of this podcast. So that was wonderful. Had a very nice dinner. He lucked out, and we're having abnormally sunny and warm weather in Vancouver. Normally by October it is raining, but it has been abnormally warm and sunny. So he I believe had a great visit. We certainly had a very nice dinner together. So thank you to Greg, and wonderful time.
I've sat down and talked with a couple of researchers and PhDs that do research on sounds, but not but speech sounds, like how we speak and why we speak in different ways and all that. If you ever want to be you just be absolutely fascinated, sit down and talk to somebody like Greg's. I'm almost sure certainly the case. Their research talks about so very specific things that you're like, sure. I would never have even thought of that. That's how it's not in my. If you gave me 1,000,000 years to think about sounds and speaking and other things, never would I have come up with this.
Well, yeah, a lot of PhD studies, they do get very specific. That's how you get into the doctorates. So I just felt, I mentioned this to Greg, I'm really quite proud that our listenership includes really, really highly educated people because, he says he's been listening to us for years and enjoyed us. I'm like, well, then we can't be doing too much terribly wrong because we wouldn't hold on to listeners such as him if we were way off the mark. So, I feel quite proud of that.
I really, some people get intimidated by talking to people that are smarter than them. And there are so many people out there that are smarter than me. It's nice to sit down and listen to them talk about what they are smart about. And everybody's smart about something. I've got no problems. You talk to a mechanic and just get them talking about cars and stuff like that. There's so much stuff in there that never would have crossed my mind. Anyways, I go on. We got Jack here who sent photos with permission to use them on AV Gadgets. I am so far behind on all you people who have sent me pictures. I'm going to get to them. I'm going to do it. I'm just swamped with children and now hurricanes.
I should have added Greg in there too. Greg also sent photos with permission to use them. I neglected to add that to our little list here.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jack. We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going and well wishes for me in particular this past week during Hurricane Ian. Sorry.
There it is.
Ian.
Got to it eventually.
Ivan also came through Tampa, but it was many years ago. We got those notes of gratitude from Julian, Karl, Jack, BJ, Clara, Jorge, Infinite Gary, who appreciated that. Even when using a headset and recording from his car, Rob's vocal clarity last week was still better than some other podcasts. It takes so very little to make good audio. Like just a little bit of cleaning it up, a little bit of noise reduction, a little bit of compression. And it's not really that hard. It is about the microphones that you use in the environment that you're in. But
I'm not going to be super humble on that because I agree. I have heard some podcasts where, yes, they have atrocious audio quality stuff.
And there's no reason for it. I swear they're in like tubs. I don't know where they are.
I mean, I am not happy about my current audio quality, but I'm like, well, if you can make out what I'm saying, then that'll be all right. That'll be good enough for now.
We've got notes from Gurinder, Jonathan in the CDN 4.0, Ilango, Kris, Nathan, Greg, who's a member of our 2 Hour Plus Club version 2.0, and Bertrand. So let's go through those again real quick.
I can do them.
You do that.
You've mentioned the names there. And I did want to say some of the messages that were sent in. I focused on the ones that came in via email. I'm not sure. I'm sure Tom has not been able to look at them all because there's just too much to go through. But some very nice wishes that I certainly echo, hoping that Tom and his family were safe. So thank you very much to everybody for your concerns. We're very happy that things turned out mostly okay for Tom. So Julian, Karl, Jack, BJ, Clara, Jorge, Infinite Gary, Gurinder, Jonathan, Ilango, Kris, Nathan, Greg, and Bertrand. Thank you all very much for sending us the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
All right. In the news, and there was quite a bit this week. I don't know how much is on this list, but I know there was quite a bit this week as I was in the midst of a hurricane getting press releases and like trying.
Well, it
in
was
fact, this podcast got out last week by 2 hours.
Right.
I got the podcast posted. 2 hours later, we lost internet at Clint's house, and a couple hours after that, we lost power.
Wow.
So yes, it was very, very close to not happening last week. So yes. Okay, in the news, Karl. This comes from Karl. At Stadia 2022, JVC celebrated their 25th anniversary D-ILA projectors. I hate that name. And to mark the occasion, they will release 25 units of a special D-ILA 25 LTD model in December.
25 limited.
Yeah, baby. The 25 units will be hand-selected versions of their flagship NZ9 with chrome accents on the case. Chrome accents. It's going to have flames painted on it. And a 25th anniversary logo when you power it up. Plus, well, that's okay. At least they did that. Because when you power it up, because I thought there was going to be a 25th anniversary logo on the projector.
I mean, there is.
No one's going to see it. But anyways. Plus, the hand-selected chips will be spec'd to deliver 150,000 to 1 native contrast. The NZ9 is spec'd at 100,000 to 1. And each and every unit will be individually calibrated. They'll sell for $30,000, which is $4,000 more than the NZ9. I'll be honest with you, that doesn't seem like that much money.
I was a little surprised. If they had priced it at $35,000, it would not have shocked me whatsoever. Yeah. So, all right.
Yeah, that seems just. I mean, I think if I was on the market for a $26,000 projector,
right.
I might consider a slightly better performing one for $4,000.
Absolutely, yeah. Making only 25 units, I think, was a mistake. They should have probably made like 250 or maybe not 2,500, but 250 of them would have made more sense, I think.
Yeah. JVC also announced that their current projector lineup will continue. No new replacements coming yet. That's not a surprise. They will get a firmware update that further enhances their frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping to allow users to target overall higher brightness and be able to store multiple different tone mapping modes so that you can easily switch depending on the viewing conditions. They'll also get filmmaker mode and support for even more screens within the theater optimizer.
So this is something that we saw previously with the NX series. Those were around for a good 3 years, and so the updates that were coming rather than entirely new models were firmware updates that kept improving that frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that they offer. So yep, they're continuing that on with the NZ, NZ series, and that's what we're getting with from JVC this year.
All right. Google confirmed that they're shutting down Stadia. And to the collective response of, that's still around? Okay.
Well, I mean, so that's what Google thought. Somebody mentioned it, and they're like, we're still paying for that?
Anyways, that's their cloud gaming service, if you've forgotten.
Yeah.
And it's being shut down on January 18th, 2023. So you got lots of times to prepare yourself emotionally for it. If you're a Stadia user, hopefully you bought your hardware, the controller plus the Chromecast Ultra, through the Google Store, since they will be refunding the full purchase price on hardware and all game sales, with plans to have the majority of refunds completed by mid-January 2023. If you had subscribed to Stadia Pro, you won't get a refund for that. So, up yours, I guess? I don't know.
I mean, that was the subscription thing that gave you a library of games that you could access, very much like Xbox Game Pass. Stadia, normally, you paid to access it, but then you had to buy each and every game individually, even though they were being streamed to you. So, yes, that word buy in quotation marks, because now we're seeing what results when your game library is only streamed to you.
Yeah. So you'll be able to continue playing your Stadia games up until January 18th, but then they're gone. And then they also warned that until then, there might be some gameplay issues, especially any games requiring commerce. So, any fool who's fool enough to spend more money on a game system that is literally going to disappear in a couple of months deserves to have bad performance in that game, as far as I'm concerned. So some Stadia users noticed something was up a little before the official announcement, as the Stadia Game Store was closed with no ability to purchase games or add-ons a few hours prior. Any pre-orders have been canceled, and there's no need to return anything in order to receive your refunds. So I guess you got to prove somehow. Well, if you bought it through the store, they'll know. The Google Store, they'll know who you are.
Yes, it is.
That's why they're doing it that way.
If you purchased it through the Google Store. If you purchased it from a third-party vendor, then you're probably not getting a hardware refund. The stuff like this, it also, like imagine you're a much smaller company than Google. This sort of creates the expectation that if you run some sort of failed subscription thing, that you're supposed to refund everybody for the entire time that existed. Stadia's been around since 2019. That's a significant amount of money that they're going to be refunding, even though that for Google type of numbers, they didn't have a gigantic subscriber base and didn't sell a gigantic number of games. It was still millions and millions and millions of dollars that Google is able to just be like, all right, well, whatever, we'll just give it back to everybody so that nobody complains too much. But you can't expect that from everybody. Yeah. But this creates a whole bunch of just sort of really bad expectations going forward, in my opinion. I don't like any of this.
Yeah. This reminds me of when you were a kid and you decided you were going to be an artist, but you didn't really know how to draw. So you got a book, or maybe you bought a book. Maybe you got it from the library about how to draw comic book characters. Mm-hmm. This may sound like a personal experience, but there's no evidence of this. And then you went home and you practiced, for 2 hours, and everything looked like crap. So you gave up. You had already told everybody that's what you were going to do. So you kind of you just stopped talking about it until people forgot, and then you gave the book back or you sold it.
Right.
That's kind of what this is like, but from a company that has more money than they know what to do with.
Yeah. This is not helping the stereotype and reputation that, Google tries a lot of things and most of them don't stick around very long. So yeah. That's not helping with that.
So after the success of their, let me see, did I skip something?
No.
Okay. After the success of their smaller 48 and 42-inch OLED TVs, LG Display has announced that they will begin manufacturing 32 and 27-inch OLED display panels, whatever. These with monitors at those sizes expected sometime in 2023. So 32 and 27-inch OLEDs,
which is it's just white. So that is the panels that we're using in the big screen displays, the 42, 48, 55, 65, 77, 83, 88, and now 97-inch panels. Those 97 inches are out now. I should have put that in the news story here, but I'll throw it in here, all being LG. The 97 inches are available to pre-order now in the United States for $25,000. So that's the same price as the 88-inch 8K models that LG is selling. $25,000 can get you a 97-inch 4K OLED. So kind of interesting. Let's see. I think from the very first predictions we had maybe a bit higher, but that's honestly a bit lower than a lot of us were predicting the 97-inch would end up costing. Still a lot of money, $25,000 obviously, but yeah, you can get the 97. But anyway, WOLED is just white OLED, and that is the same technology they're using in all the TVs now. Going to start making 27-inch and 32-inch panel sizes.
Hooray. Oh, no. All right. YouTube has started experimenting with much longer, unskippable ad breaks, as well as locking 4K and 8K resolution HDR behind their YouTube Premium paywall. Yeah, I've noticed some weirdness in YouTube lately, too. It usually restarts another video, like, right away. It tells you, hey, I'm going to start this. Stop it if you don't want to. Now it doesn't do that. Or at least it hasn't done that for me in the last 2 days. Maybe I need to restart my computer. I don't know. But it's been a little weird. Random users all around the world were subjected to 8, 10, or 12 unskippable ads in a row, primarily on smart TVs, as part of a small experiment globally that served multiple ads in an ad pod, with the goal of building a better experience for viewers by reducing the number of ad breaks. I don't think you know what building a better experience means. I don't think you should use that phrase because you clearly do not understand.
Have we not just started replicating broadcast television at this point?
Random users also discovered the previously free 2160p and 8K resolution versions unavailable unless they would tap to upgrade to YouTube Premium, which costs $12 a month or $120 a year. I just don't know what's going on in the world anymore. I don't know what's happening. Like, people, it's like they don't remember why it was we stopped. We cut the cord to begin with. They're like, oh, they cut the cord because they wanted to get their own content, but surely they won't mind getting. The last time I watched cable TV at my parents' house, I wanted to throw myself out the window. It was like ads every 5 minutes.
Right.
I'm like, how is this? How did I ever survive? I mean, I guess it was because I didn't know any better. I guess I just didn't know any better and didn't have an option. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's just going to drive me to. I won't even know where I'm going to go after this if they could keep doing stuff like this, because I can't go back to ads. I can't. Right. I don't mind paying. And I don't mind missing stuff. Like, I love to watch House of the Dragon or whatever the heck it's called. Yeah. But I'm not getting another streaming service right now. I don't have the money for it. Money's real tight. I got 2 kids, one in college and 2 at home. And they're all wanting to do stuff, and we got trees falling through our yard.
That's
and
right.
Hurricanes to dodge. I'm not paying for HBO Max. I'm sorry.
Well, they're killing everything over there at Brothers Discovery anyway, so you won't have to worry about it too much longer.
Warner Brothers Discovery, the Blockbuster 2.0. Comments from our listeners. Dazz just wanted to share his most recent iteration of his DIY acoustic panel frames. The first ones he made using cheap furring strips, which weren't exactly uniform and straight. Now he's using pine boards that are straighter, and also switched to make pocket holes using a Craig brand jig. Kreg. I don't want you to spell Craig wrong and get confused. The cheapest he could find, which helps line everything up a lot easier. He's hoping these new panels will look nice enough that Dre, his wife, will be okay using them in their open concept living room. He isn't aiming for great acoustics in that space, but he is hoping it'll help with conversation, which gets pretty loud and echoey in there right now. Wish him luck. Dude, you and me both. And my wife does get it. But she's also seen the quality of my DIY panels, and they are perfectly fine for in here, but they are not good enough for the rest of the house. So
from the images that he sent, these look very nice to me. I'd be perfectly happy with those. So yeah, that's good. He found a method that seems to produce good results.
Yeah. Ilango wanted to help with some info regarding heat management above a gas fireplace for folks who want to mount a flat screen. He looked into this himself and found helpful information from Montego? I don't know. A major gas fireplace manufacturer. They suggest installing the fireplace using a cool wall We'll have a link for that in the show notes, which helps to divert the heat that normally warms the wall directly above the fireplace. It should be noted that they still say the safest recommendation is to keep electronics away from fireplaces. But since it's so common, they also mention zero clearance fireplace units, recessed TVs, and using a mantle, although they warn that heat will still wrap around because that's how convection and
it does, yes,
heat works. And the wall behind the TV will still be hot unless a cool wall is also used. So there is like an insane amount of hate for TVs above fireplaces, and it is well deserved. But I live in Florida, and people who put their TV above a fireplace are ludicrous because they don't use their fireplace.
Right.
They don't, because there's like 3 days a year where you'll walk down the street and everybody's cold and you'll see fireplaces going. And I'm like, you're going to burn down your house because you haven't cleaned that chimney out in ever. And who knows what's living up there. Stop it. And they don't know how to use them either, too. It's hilarious. Because I grew up in California, and we had like a stove insert for our fireplace. That's what we used because we were poor. That's what we used for heat for the entire house, that and some fans. And that was, I'm telling you, even in that situation, we still had flames shooting up out of our chimney at least once in my lifetime that I can remember. So, but yes, I understand people wanting to do it. I highly recommend you sit in the chair that you have in your room that you're planning on sitting in, and then try to stare or just keep your eyes up above your fireplace for like 5 minutes. And if it's comfortable for you, well then fine. But if at any time during that you're like, this sort of sucks, imagine that for an entire afternoon while you're watching a football game or a bunch of football games. So yeah, whatever. Let's get some questions in here. Matt, is it actually a good idea to have all three of your front speakers behind the acoustically transparent screen? He's never actually heard a home setup in person that was done this way, but of course he's been to movie theaters, and those all have all the front speakers behind the screen. However, he was always under the impression that at home the front, left, and right channels were for sounds just to the outside edges of your display, and for the soundtrack music, of course. Furthermore, when he's seen photos of home setups with all three front speakers behind the screen, he's often thought they appeared to be too close together, seemingly just so they all fit behind the screen. Wouldn't they just end up sounding like a giant soundbar that way? Is he missing something? Or do people just think it's cool and trendy, but not actually the best way to place your speakers? So think of a movie theater, right? Just think of a movie theater. How big is the screen? The screen is the entire front wall. It's all of it.
As close to it as they can get. It's pretty much wall to wall, yeah.
It's pretty much wall to wall. So, in a movie theater, you are always sitting, almost always sitting in between the front, left, and right speakers.
Sure.
In some way. You just are. So, your assertion, Matt, is something that I often agree with, which is I see people putting all three speakers behind their screens, and their screens are not big enough to support all three speakers, which is why the false wall, unfortunately for many people, they think that the speakers still need to go behind the screen. The whole idea of the false wall is that you can put them anywhere you want. And you can put them outside the screen if that makes sense. The speakers should be placed based on your seating and the room size and everything else, not necessarily how wide your screen is.
Yeah.
So if you were to do your acoustically transparent screen the way that a movie theater does, so that it is super duper wide and takes up the entire front wall, and your couch fits within the width of the screen, then yes, it is appropriate to put them there. But I agree with you. Too often, people get an acoustically transparent screen and slam all three speakers back there.
Right.
That said, Clint does have an acoustically transparent screen. All three speakers are behind it. If you look at the pictures of his screen, you will think they are too close together based on what it looks like. But he has ginormous speakers, and the screen does fill the entire front of the room, so it is appropriate. It just doesn't look that way in the pictures. So sometimes the pictures can be deceiving.
Yeah, the other way to sort of come at this and look at this, of course, are like following Dolby's speaker placement guidelines and going by the angles, the range of angles that are offered in there. And so we'll see that the front, left, and right speakers in Dolby's speaker placement guidelines are meant to be anywhere from plus or minus 22.5 degrees to the left and right of center, which would be called 0 degrees, or up to plus or minus 30 degrees to the left and right of center. So that's sort of the range. The 22.5 to 30 degrees to the left and right of center is where Dolby is saying angle-wise they want your front, left, and right speakers. Now, if we consider what is our field of view of the screen, now if you're me, you like a 45-degree field of view, which you'll notice lines up with, that would put the left and right edges of the screen exactly where the tweeters of the speakers would be if I went for the plus or minus 22.5 degrees, the smallest angles to the left and right of center that Dolby recommends in their speaker placement guidelines. So in that situation, obviously I wouldn't have the tweeters directly behind the frames of my screen being blocked that way. I would put my speakers slightly wider apart, still well within the up to plus or minus 30 degrees. So my left and right speakers would end up to the outside edges of my screen. Even if it were acoustically transparent, I would have my center speaker behind my acoustically transparent screen, but my front, left, and rights would be just to the outside edges. But of course, there are people who like to have a 55-degree field of view at home. And if that's the case, you've got a screen that size and you're sitting that close to the screen that you end up with, a 50 or 55-degree field of view, well, now your front, left, and right speakers could go to the inside edges of your acoustically transparent screen and you'd be within Dolby's guidelines. You'd have a larger field of view than I personally enjoy, but if that's the way you like to enjoy movies, you like to sit in the front half of the movie theater when you go out to the cinema, well, then that all makes sense. So there's the very practical, sort of easy to understand idea, which is that, the seats that you care about, they should be somewhere in between your front, left, and right speakers. But then you can also look at the Dolby angle guidelines and factor in the size of your screen. So it's not an all or nothing. It's not as though there's no scenario where having all three of your front speakers behind an acoustically transparent screen makes sense. It does make sense if you've got that sort of size of field of view. But I do agree that a lot of people are probably doing that because they're just thinking to themselves, when I go to the movie theater, all the front speakers are behind the screen, so that's what I want to do at home, and maybe not actually calculating the angles to make sure that the front, left, and right speakers are spread wide enough apart. They're just going for the aesthetic of all the speakers being behind the screen. I think that's about that.
Okay. Luke has a PC with an AMD RX 5700 XT graphics card. It's very specific for something that he's not going to keep for very much longer. It has a HDMI 2.0, so it can output 4K 60, but not 4K 120 via HDMI. He's got it connected to a Samsung QN90A, and he's hoping to upgrade to one of AMD's newest GPUs when they release, hopefully later this year. He's got two AV receivers with no intentions to upgrade those, a Denon X3400H and a Sony DH740 that's currently in use with this system. How does he have two receivers with one? Whatever, it doesn't matter. I don't care anymore. So as he understands it, if he wants 4K 120, he'll have to plug his PC directly into a Samsung, correct? Since neither of his AV receivers has HDMI 2.1. That's what he's doing right now, just to get stable 4K 60, but then he has to use his PC's optical output to send audio to his Sony receiver. Thus far, he's been limited to sending a stereo signal, whether he uses his PC optical port or sends the audio to his TV via HDMI and then uses the TV's optical port to pass along just the audio. Why is that? Why can't he get at least 5.1 surround sound? It always seems to just be two-channel PCM. If I've learned one thing on Reddit, and I've learned very few things on Reddit, it's that connecting a PC to your TV is opening a can of worms of, like, trying to figure out why things don't work the way they should.
Yeah, there are definitely unintuitive settings that are involved when you're plugging a PC into a consumer television rather than a computer monitor.
That's right. I will say, though, that so he's not planning on upgrading his AV receiver no matter what.
But
so
he does have a Denon X3400H on hand,
right.
So
yeah,
that'll come into play with the next coming up questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean the The reason that it's defaulting to coming out as 2-channel PCM is that PCs always default to outputting PCM audio. And the
Right.
reason for that is because there are multiple sources of sound going on in your PC, not the least of which is even if you're only using one program, one app, then there's all the operating system sounds that are going on in the background. So much like the default audio output of an Xbox, you end up with PCM audio because that's what your computer can mix all the various sound sources that might be happening, including just, alerts and button sounds and those types of things. It can mix all of those together and output that all as one stream, which it does as PCM audio. So if you're using PCM audio, pulse code modulation is what that stands for. That's just basic digital audio, no coding or decoding happening there. What comes out of an optical audio output is limited to 2 channels of PCM. An optical audio output just doesn't have the bandwidth to pass along any more channels of PCM than 2. And the same goes for the original version of HDMI audio return channel, HDMI ARC,
Right.
which is what your Sony receiver that you're using right now supports. Your Sony receiver supports the original version of HDMI audio return channel, and that had the exact same limitations as optical audio connections. So again, with PCM audio, you're going to be limited to 2 channels with that. Now, some PCs, depending on what sound software you have loaded and what sound card is built into your PC, you might have the option, just like an Xbox, of setting it to output Dolby Digital 5.1 bitstream audio. Now, the PC will actually be mixing everything together first inside of itself and then putting it all into a Dolby Digital container. That's how that would be working. So it's not as though it's just sending like original Dolby Digital 5.1 audio from your sources. No, it's still going to be treating everything as PCM audio inside of the computer first, but then it'll throw it all into a Dolby Digital container and send that out as a bit stream. So if that's a setting that's available in your sound output options, you could try setting your PC to output just vanilla Dolby Digital 5.1 audio. Keep in mind, the PC is decoding all of the audio you're ever hearing first, and it's managing all of the audio, mixing it together, and then putting it in that container. But it would allow you to have a 5.1 signal coming out of your PC that would work either via the optical port or through the original version of HDMI audio return channel.
All right. His Samsung TV says it can do audio pass-through, but only via its HDMI eARC port. He tried using this with the Sony's receiver's ARC port, but he still ended up limited to just stereo. Why? I think you just answered that.
Yep, I'm pretty sure that's the exact same answer that's going on there. And it is just the realization that, yes, eARC, the enhanced audio return channel, that allows for multi-channel PCM audio. You can do, I think it can actually do like 32 channels of PCM audio or something like that, uncompressed audio in the enhanced audio return channel. But that original ARC port that your Sony receiver has, it's going to be limited to 5.1 Dolby Digital. In some cases, at this point, I have to say in some cases, because not all TVs even support DTS of any kind anymore, but in some cases, just vanilla DTS 5.1. And then, yes, PCM audio, but only 2 channels of it. So your Samsung TV is sending along the audio that your Sony receiver is capable of accepting via its original HDMI ARC port. So it is sending the audio through, but yeah, it can't send multi-channel PCM because regular ARC can't handle that.
All right. So is he going to be forced to either buy a new receiver that can handle HDMI 2.1 or what seems to be an overpriced HDMI audio extractor? With a PC as his source, surely there's a way to send just the audio to his receiver and separately send the 4K 120 video to his TV. There isn't.
Well, I mean, he's got a couple of options here that should be able to work. So the first would be take that X3400H that you already have on hand and swap that with your current Sony receiver, because the X3400H does have eARC. It has enhanced audio return channel. So the connection path would be your PC plugged straight into your Samsung QN90A QLED television, and then you would use eARC to send multi-channel PCM out of the Samsung television's eARC port and into your Denon X3400H receiver. So that's probably the easiest solution because it's a very similar setup to what you have now. It just means swapping out the two receivers that you already own. The other option is, I'm not sure what motherboard he's using because it's kind of rare to not have a motherboard on your PC that came with its own HDMI port. Obviously he's using the HDMI port that's going to be built into his AMD graphics card, but most motherboards just come with an HDMI port of their own, and usually you can go into the sound output settings in Windows, and instead of choosing the sound output to go out of your AMD GPU, you can have it come out of the HDMI port that's just built into the motherboard. But he said he had to resort to optical, so there are motherboards out there that don't have any integrated graphics built onto them, so that could be the case. The AMD GPU will have both DisplayPort and HDMI ports. You could attempt to actually use a DisplayPort output for the video side of things, which would then need a DisplayPort to HDMI conversion cable, and then that would reserve the HDMI port on your AMD GPU just for audio, so that could be another solution to get around things there. So I wouldn't point you at trying to mess with any HDMI audio extractor because honestly, you'd need one that supports HDMI 2.1, and at this point, that means going to like an HDMI HD Fury 8K Vroom unit, which is $550, which is a bit ridiculous just to perform HDMI audio extraction because you need to be able to pass through 4K 120 and VRR. So honestly, the solution that makes the most sense to me here is put that X3400H into this system and just use eARC. That's exactly what it was designed to do.
And good luck with that because notoriously buggy.
Well, yeah, there are pains with eARC to be sure, but it's certainly the least expensive solution. Given all the
it's the one you're going to try. It's going to work for a while, and then it's going to stop working. You're going to ask us why, and we're going to go, I don't know. Could be anything. Could be anything. So yes, HDMI is HDMI is the boy you have not met yet that your daughter fell in love with.
Okay.
It's always a disappointment. Okay. That's what HDMI is. Infinite Gary. Last week, Rob and Lee covered the new directional subwoofer mode offered by the new Denon and Marantz receiver models that include 4 independent subwoofer pre-outs. Once you set your subwoofer layout to 2, 3, or 4 subwoofers, the manual makes it clear that the dedicated LFE channel will be played out of all subwoofers in mono. But bass from these speakers at the small will only be sent to the nearest subwoofer. I hate that. I hate it a lot.
See, I included this question because I knew that the one person who definitely wouldn't listen to our podcast last week was Tom.
And I would. And you could say it was because I was busy with the hurricane, but the reality is I wasn't going to listen to it anyway. But
and this information that we talked about with the Denon and Marantz new AV receiver models that include the 4 independent subwoofer outputs, this is stuff I want to cover with Tom because it's I found it quite interesting. So this is the whole directional subwoofer thing that they're offering as a subwoofer mode. Thankfully, the standard mode, which is the default, works the way subwoofer outputs used to on Denon and Marantz models, which is that all the bass comes out in mono, whether using 2, 3, or 4. But they do have this directional option, so wanted Tom to be aware of that. And then, I didn't include it in this question, but the other part that was under this, Tom, is that you do have the option in these new AV receiver models from Denon and Marantz that have 4 subwoofer pre-outs to put subwoofer 4 pre-out, like the one that's labeled as sub 4, as a dedicated tactile transducer output. So that one will do the thing where it independently has delay and levels, as well as no EQ being applied to sub out 4 if you set it as a dedicated tactile transducer output.
Well,
I thought
isn't that smart?
Would be agreeable to you, but this whole thing of the directional subwoofer setting, we do not like.
Okay. Sorry, I got off that thing. Oh, wait. I don't know where I scrolled from. Okay, I was looking at the pictures. Mm-hmm. Rob is pretty adamant that we'd only recommend using the standard default subwoofer mode, which plays all subwoofers together in mono and reroutes all of the bass from all the speakers as well as the LFE channels to all the subs. But some folks online have claimed the people who don't own one of these things yet, nor do they own 4 subwoofers, nor have they tried it out, nor do they have any experience with this. But some folks online have claimed that this directional subwoofer mode will typically result in a better blending of the subwoofers to the speakers. Any thoughts on that? They are wrong. like objectively and provably wrong.
Right.
Like there's this goes straight back to that stupid you want to have your subwoofers directly underneath your speakers.
It's very much a throwback to that. Yes.
That's all this is. And I don't know how many times Gary and the rest of you, but Gary specifically, who I know listens to this, I think he listens. He asks enough questions. I would hope he listens to the answers. I don't know how many times we have to say that the subwoofer is not a standalone speaker. It is not by itself. The subwoofer is part and parcel with the room it's in and all the other subwoofers that are in there.
Yes.
So it is part of a system, and putting it closer to in fact, I just published an article, I think last week, which was like, what does it mean that you have pressurized a room?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of went through it, and basically the idea is that a room is pressurized with bass when, all things being equal, as you move the speaker or yourself throughout the space, the relative volume does not change. Mm-hmm. Now, yes, there's going to be room modes and stuff like that, which are going to make things sound louder or sound softer, but overall, the volume level as you move a sub throughout the room, or as you move yourself throughout the room and leaving the subs where they are, should stay the same. That means your room is pressurized. Mm-hmm. That alone tells you, just by itself, exactly why having the subwoofer closer to a speaker play is somehow going to change how it. No, it's not how it works. It has never been how it works, and we understand it now. So if we could just, as a group, stop being stupid, that would be so awesome for me. That would really clarify things for me.
I can think of the one scenario where this directional subwoofer mode setting would actually make sense to use, and that is if your home theater is set up outdoors. No boundaries anywhere near you, and 50 feet away from any reflective surface, ideally including the ground, but we might be able to get away with ground plane being involved here. So, if your home theater is set up outdoors with no walls and no ceiling, then you can go ahead and deploy directional subwoofers. But yeah, that is the only case where this would make sense. It all goes back to just I grant you, intuitive notion that, hey, if the signal to my front left speaker is full range, then doesn't it make sense that the ideal, quote unquote, would be a full range speaker in the front left position? And barring a single cabinet unit that's capable of playing the full range, wouldn't it make sense, if I'm forced to use a subwoofer to play the lowest couple of octaves, to put that subwoofer directly underneath that front left speaker, so that when the front left channel plays a sound that is at 20 hertz, it emanates from the same physical location as everything else that comes out of that front left channel? We have to admit that there is a sort of intuitive sense to that I can understand. I can understand anybody who thinks that way, because I went through that thought process myself. Envisioned the home theater, which at the time would have been 7 speakers. Atmos didn't exist back when I was thinking about this, but thinking, yeah, maybe I get, 7 smaller subwoofers so that I can have one in the same physical location as all 7 of my speakers, and then I can set all those channels to full range, and we'll do the whole pre-outs and separate amplifiers and everything to make this all work. But yeah, I went through that thought process, so it's not foreign to me where the intuition of it all could have come from. But thanks to Todd Welty's research, Harman's research, we know, not just from mathematical modeling, but also from real-world measurements of subwoofers, that at these low bass frequencies with these very long wavelengths in a room where it is inescapable that by the time you hear that sound, it will have reflected off of multiple surfaces in that room. And we are not just dealing with a sound that went directly from the subwoofer to your ears. It most definitely bounced off of something before your brain was ever able to perceive it. That in that scenario, it is different from the mid-range and treble frequencies, which are short enough wavelengths that they made a straight path from the speaker to your ear, and they are short enough wavelengths. The distance between your two ears on either side of your head can triangulate where that higher frequency sound came from. In those scenarios, you need the sound to emanate from the location where you want to be able to point over there and say, that's where the sound came from. But once we get down to bass with these long wavelengths, that all goes away, and we don't need to worry that the bass is emanating from the same physical location in the room as the mid-range and treble from that same speaker channel. So it's understandable. It comes from intuition, but the idea that you're going to have a better blend by having 4 subwoofers in the 4 corners of your room, and the front left speaker channel is only going to play its bass out of the subwoofer that's in the front left corner of the room, that's just going to result in anytime bass is coming from a particular speaker channel and not from the dedicated low frequency effects channel. Depending on where you're sitting in the room, you're going to get a different experience from seat to seat to seat, because we're essentially back to a single subwoofer for any of the individual speaker channels. And we're all on board at this point with multiple subwoofers. Why would we go back to only using a single subwoofer whenever the bass that came from any speaker channel happens to play? That part doesn't. Right.
I saw a question on Reddit that said the other day that said, my family thinks that I should just get this single speaker solution because 2 speakers won't sound good for music. You have to have 3. It's like, I just don't even understand where people are anymore. Like, what is happening in this country where people think that stereo speakers won't sound good for music? I mean, stereo.
So the solution is a single speaker?
I cannot tell you, Rob, how hard my head hit the wall when I read that question.
I mean, I guess that's what all the smart speaker manufacturers want you to believe, because hey, just go get an Echo and all of your musical problems have been solved.
Julian just bought a refurbished JVC RS1000. It's the same as the old NX5. And a ceiling mount with a JVC-specific mounting plate, all from AV Science, thanks to our recommendation. He also separately ordered one of the APC gaming performance battery backup units for a bit of extra protection.
Congratulations, all very nice purchases.
He's got a Panasonic UB420 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. He tried using his HDR optimizer with his Epson 3800 projector. That was now replaced. It's now been replaced with this JVC. Given that the JVC has their frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping for HDR, should he use the Panasonic's HDR optimizer or just send the unaltered HDR10 signal out from the player? See, so this sounds familiar to me. I want to say you set the player to put out the one that the JVC is best at frame-by-frame tone mapping and then do it that way, or... That would be my guess, but I might be wrong. Go, Rob.
I mean, my opinion take on this, and this is a bit subjective, because I mean, obviously you can try both and see if you prefer one or the other.
Anything.
But given that the JVCs do actually just ignore the metadata when they're in their frame-by-frame HDR mode, they just ignore the metadata, and frame-by-frame they analyze the histogram of the image that is being displayed and apply their own tone mapping to that. My inclination would be to have the Panasonic player just output the raw HDR10 stream, don't use the HDR optimizer on the Panasonic, and let the JVC just do that frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. Now, the reason I say that is because the HDR optimizer in the Panasonic players, it does pay attention to the metadata. So the problem is that on some discs, the metadata is wrong, or the metadata just doesn't exist. And so in those cases, the Panasonic might be reserving more headroom than it actually needs to, right? But it's basically saying, okay, the metadata says the brightest pixel in this whole movie is 1500 nits, but it turns out that metadata isn't really correct, or it's on screen for a fraction of a second and the rest of the movie has nothing even close to 1500 nits. But because the metadata said that's the brightest pixel, the Panasonic went and went ahead and reserved a bunch of headroom at the highlights level, the higher nit levels. It reserved a bunch of headroom, meaning it darkened the entire rest of the movie when it didn't really need to. Or the scenario where the metadata is all just zeroed out, it now has to assume that the brightest pixel is 10,000 nits, the brightest that HDR10 could possibly be. And so it's reserved a bunch of headroom for highlight detail that doesn't actually exist in this movie. And the whole rest of the movie is darkened more than it needed to be to fit within the tone map that the Panasonic is applying. So does this apply to every movie or even the majority of the movies? No, absolutely not. So that means you might do some tests with discs and be like, oh, I like the way it looks with the Panasonic HDR optimizer a little bit better than just sending it out with the HDMI HDR optimizer turned off and just the JVC doing its tone mapping. But the issue is that when you get some of those discs with incorrect metadata or blanked out metadata, then that's where I would turn off the HDR optimizer on the Panasonic. So that's my inclination. I think the JVC does a really, really good job of the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, and there'll be another... Oh, no. The firmware update is only for the NZ series. Sorry, it's not going to apply to your NX. I got your hopes up there briefly. But regardless, it already does a very nice job of its own frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, ignoring the metadata and sidestepping this whole issue of potentially darkening the movie more than necessary.
Do what Rob said. He's using a 100-inch pull-down Elite Screens white screen. No plans to upgrade the screen for a while, but is this relatively inexpensive screen unworthy of a JVC projector? Nope.
Absolutely not.
I think in the history of home theater, it's hard to find something that was more overpriced than projector screens were for the longest time. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that's been overpriced in home theater, and still is for that matter. In the high end world, of course, there's lots of it, but for the longest time, it was just like, we're selling projector screens for thousands of dollars because literally no one else is selling them.
Sure.
And then Elite Screens and
Silver Ticket
came out and said,
and even Karada to some extent before those guys.
Yeah, Karada was kind of undercutting the entire industry, but they were still selling them for a lot. But they also had some pretty cool products too, like the motorized masking and the stuff like that, which granted, and is pretty awesome. But yeah, screens. Like, I don't think a screen needs to be like super. I don't think there's like a high. There's a very definite level of. It just needs to be this good, and then anything better than that, you're like, I don't see it. Maybe.
Yeah, no, I can get it. You're like, I got a much more expensive projector than my old projector, so doesn't that mean I need a much more expensive screen? It's like, now as long as your screen is white with uniform diffusion of that light into your room, there's not much else that needs to be done. So don't feel bad that your screen costs significantly less than your projector. Right. There's nothing wrong with it.
I guess the only thing I would worry about with any screen is if it's a square.
Yes.
Can you see any sort of texture on it, and the black border around it? Yeah. How absorptive is it? Those are the three things I care about. Now, of course, acoustically transparent is another host of problems that go on there. But for what you're talking about, I mean, that's the only thing I worry about. If you're not seeing the overshoot, if the screen looks relatively square to you, and you're not seeing a texture, just don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. So his front wall is white, and he discovered that in order for the image from the JVC to fill the entire width of a 16:9 screen, he needs to zoom in the projector, which means there's a very faint glow on the left and right black borders of his screen, and then a fairly visible glow, especially with any bright scenes or colors, just to either side of the screen on his front white wall. I can see this. Yes, there's overshoot going on here. Yes. He's read that's because the chips JVC uses are actually 17:9, not 16:9. But is there any way to get rid of that overspill just via the settings, or does he need to install some masking or paint at least part of his front wall? I don't know if there's a setting in there, but yeah, that front white wall is certainly not helping your situation here at all. Using some paint or just acoustic panel back there, man, that's got like
sure. Or even just the roll of stick-on, cheap flocking velvet thing that you can just buy from Amazon, just the self-adhesive type of thing. But I did want to address this. So we have talked about this with the JVC projectors, the genuine 4K resolution. They are cinema 4K resolution, which is 4096 by 2160. That's the pixel count. Whereas ultra high definition is 3840 by 2160. So you'll notice that the vertical pixel count, the 2160, that's the same for both 4K cinema and ultra high definition, but the number of pixels width-wise across is wider in the cinema version. It's 4096 versus 3840 for ultra-high definition. So, of course, all of our sources at home are ultra-high definition. They're the 3840 going across. So 3840 by 2160, that's the 16 by 9 aspect ratio. But the chips in the JVCs, the genuine 4K resolution chips, are 4096 by 2160. So they are, in fact, wider. Now, what's throwing him a little bit here is that, he's putting up the alignment test pattern. He's putting up the solid color that illuminates the entire chip. Almost all of this is a moot point once you start watching actual content, because the actual content will be 16 by 9, and you'll have black bars on the projector itself. What'll be coming out on those little bits that are overspilling to the left and right of your 16 by 9 screen, that'll just be black bars. Now, they aren't 100% pitch black, but I mean, the black bars coming out of a JVC projector are pretty close to black, and once those hit the black border of your Elite screen, and then even the white wall, yes, if you walked right up to it, you might be able to see a faint bit of glow on that white wall still, even with the black bars, because like I say, they aren't 100% black, but it wouldn't be anything that I would consider distracting. If it is to you, though, then like I say, just some of that self-adhesive black felt that you could just throw up there, or whatever means you want to mask to the sides, that could be done. So there is no real setting to completely turn it off. One thing you definitely would want to do is that when you're watching regular content, do not use the fill screen picture mode of the JVC, which essentially just zooms the whole image in so that it fills the entire width of the panel and actually crops off a little bit at the top and the bottom of a 16 by 9 image. Stick to the regular 16 by 9 image mode so that you have the black bars coming out of the projector on the left and the right. So once you start watching actual content and not just alignment grids and full field colors, this is pretty much a moot point.
Yeah, that happens too with just about every other projector I've had as well. The alignment tool gives you that rectangle, and then there's overshoot going on there too. So that's not uncommon, and that's the other thing. This is one of those things like. It's almost like when people send in questions like, "Look at my measurements. There's a dip here." Or like,
that's right.
It's a 2 dB dip, man. What are you looking at? You can't hear that.
But if you weren't prepared for it, if you didn't know ahead of time, you're kind of like, "Oh, what the heck's going on?" I get that.
Yeah. So we've seen some people simply clamp some black fabric onto the case of their roll-down screen so that they have the option of creating masking panels across the top of their screen when watching 2.35 to 1 aspect contact ratio. He dropped by his local Joann fabric store, but didn't easily find a suitable non-reflective black fabric. So what do we think of this DIY masking fabric idea in general? And any suggestions as to what fabric to use if we think it's worth doing? First of all, my man, don't be a stereotype and ask for help at Joann's, because there's the people who are there straight up know where everything is. And as somebody who hates asking where things are in a store and would rather walk around for a half an hour looking for it myself, and under the guise of, well, if I find it myself, I'll always know where it is. Just ask somebody, because I'm sure it's there somewhere. Any sort of velvet would work.
Pretty much.
Not exactly sure. Clamp some black fabric onto the case of the roll down screen so they have the option of.
Yeah, you need to put a little loop
there?
in the. What's that?
It's always there. It's always.
Well, it's just a piece of fabric that hangs down from the case in front of the top portion of the screen to mask it off to 2.35 to 1, and then you just pull that manually, just pull that fabric up and clamp it back onto the screen when it's 16 by 9 time. I mean, that's the sort of thing where I always say, when you have to manually walk up to your screen and do it, you do it 2 or 3 times because it's kind of cool. And then if you're like me, for sure, you just get lazy enough to, like, the black bars on the JVC are pretty darn black, and I really just am too lazy to get up on my chair and go do that. But this is pretty inexpensive. Some people are willing to actually do the manual labor of getting up out of their recliner and doing this when they're changing the aspect ratios. So if you're gonna do it, like the one that's really popular, it's from Psy Fabrics. You can order it directly from them. They usually are sold over at Joann's Fabrics, but if you can't find it there, you can order it directly from Psy Fabrics. It's their triple velvet black, which goes for $11 per linear yard, and the bolt is 44 inches wide. So that's a pretty decent price for black velvet fabric that will absolutely be fine for this job. You put a little loop in the bottom of it and a little weighted bar so that you have a nice, even straight surface along the bottom when it's hanging down and acting as your mask. But that's probably the one to get. If you go to Seymour AV, they have even blacker velvet fabrics. They have their baritone velvet, which is a 60-inch wide bolt, but it goes for $11 per linear foot, not per linear yard. So that's considerably more expensive. And then even more expensive than that is the Fidelio black velvet that you can get from Seymour AV, which is $13 per linear foot and a 44-inch wide bolt. So that is definitely the most expensive in terms of like square feet that you're getting for the price. So honestly, that triple velvet black from Psy Fabrics, $11 per linear yard, is a pretty good choice if you want to do this. And I'm fine with doing it. I just don't really expect that you'll actually use it forever.
No.
I think you'll get
Yeah. I agree. Prior to ceiling mounting his new JVC, everything he read about the process said to keep the body of the projector perfectly level, but when he did that, he noticed a slight keystoning of the image on his pull-down screen. It was only about half an inch on either side, and he was able to simply tilt the projector on its mount upward a little bit and then use the lens shift to align the image to a screen. Did he do the right thing? Is there any disadvantage to having the projector tilted upward ever so slightly? And why didn't it work originally, having the projector perfectly level and firing onto a pull-down screen that ought to be hanging perfectly perpendicular? I think that last part is probably the issue here. I mean, many times we think, we assume things are, and I actually do this quite a bit. When something comes from the store or from you order like a device or something from Amazon, you assume that it has been assembled properly. You assume that because somebody has assembled it, and it must be assembled properly. Often, not often, but there are times when that is not the case. Mm-hmm. So the fact you are assuming that this pull down screen that you have is perfectly perpendicular and that you're to the ground, and
or even that putting a level
ceiling
on the case of your projector means that the lens was perfectly level. So
there's a lot that can go wrong here. So the question is, did you do right? The answer is it square? And did you? And is it inside the screen? Then the answer is yes, you have done it right.
Yeah, this is exactly why any good ceiling mount has the adjustability on all three axes. Because if you're keystoning, it means it's a little bit wider on the left-hand screen than the right-hand side of the screen. Well, that means you need to adjust the rotation of the projector on the ceiling mount a little bit, and it might look like it's completely perfectly parallel to the screen, but well, the projection tells you otherwise, and it's because the lens itself in the projector is also movable. Also keep in mind that if you've ceiling mounted the projector so that the lens of the projector is closer to the top of your screen than the bottom of your screen, then having the projector perfectly level still means that the bottom of the screen is physically farther away from the lens of the projector than the top of the screen is, which will result in some keystoning. So this perfectly level projector on a perfectly perpendicular screen, that would hold true if the lens of the projector is centered on that screen. But if you've ceiling mounted it or coffee table mounted it and the lens of the projector is closer to the top or the bottom of the screen, you're gonna get some keystoning even if the projector is perfectly level, because the distance from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen to the lens is not the same. It's not equidistant. So that explains that. You absolutely did the right thing. That's what we use our ceiling mounts for, to put those little bit of adjustments, because a tiny little bit of misalignment shows up much bigger because it's a projected image. So you absolutely did right.
So while the projector itself is refurbished, the lamp is brand new. Had 0 hours on it when he first turned it on, which is a setting you can change manually, by the way. He's noticed that when the full screen fades to black, the corners of the image are brighter than the center. He doesn't ever really notice it during regular content, but on a full fade to black, it looks a bit crappy to have these brighter corners. Some owners online have said the effects goes away for the most part after some use, but they'd like our take on as a second opinion. Projector bulbs, and because you bought it from AV Science, so I'm sure it's a new bulb. I'm not, I was saying that, but the reality is that people can just change that number and then sell it to you and tell you it's a new bulb, but AV Science will put a new bulb in there.
And anybody looking at the image on YouTube or in the Flickr album, this is an overexposed, a wildly overexposed photo, just so that we can see in the photo what he's talking about. This is not what it looks like to the naked eye.
Yeah, but we do know that projector bulbs with the first couple hundred hours of use do dim slightly, and they change. They kind of slightly. So I would not worry about this. And in particular, with something that's a mild annoyance during very specific moments is not something I would get overly concerned about unless it starts to get worse. At which point, then I would be calling AV Science and saying, "Hey, man, I think I may have gotten a dud here." But this doesn't sound like that.
No, this is they call reverse vignetting, because vignetting would be that the corners are darker than the center, but this is reverse vignetting where the corners are a bit brighter, and it is pretty typical, and it does ameliorate over the first 200 hours or so of that lamp. It doesn't go away 100%, and I get where he's coming from. He's like, "Hey, I spent a lot of money on a projector that people praise all the time, and it has imperfections. It is not perfect." And that is true. And unfortunately, we kind of got to get our mind around that it is not a perfect display. The black is not 100% black. The uniformity is not 100%. It has this bit of overscan and things like that. So unfortunately, he's running into all of that. I completely understand it. But yeah, this is not really a worry. Give it some time. Run it those 200 hours, and this will, for the most part, sort itself out.
Kiran in India. Did I say that right? I remember.
I believe it's Kiran, but he's never actually wrote in to say we're getting it right or wrong. So there we go.
All right. Well, this is what you get. Kiran recently saw an interview with the head of sales for Trinov. He said something about how increasing the number of Atmos speakers beyond the typical 7.1.4 configuration can allow you to hear more audio objects, and that this is an advantage offered by Trinov processors, said the person selling the Trinov processors. Mm-hmm. However, Trinov's own engineers have never mentioned any of this in their interviews or articles he's come across. They talk about how using a greater number of speakers can allow for more precise positioning of sounds, and how Trinov's proprietary processing allows for more accurate steerings of sounds, even when your speakers are not ideally placed, but they have never said you'll actually hear more audio objects versus a setup using fewer speakers. So was that pure marketing BS? Kiran read Tom's AV Gadgets article about how no sounds are ever actually lost, even if you're only using two speakers. And that made sense to him. But he wanted to double check if using more speakers might actually allow for more audio objects to be heard. That was crap.
I mean, to give some benefit of the doubt, I think it was a bit of like misusing words in a pretty understandable way. Like, I think what they were driving at is the idea that when you have more speakers present, it can be easier for our human ears to pinpoint and say, okay, the sound came from exactly there, then exactly there, then exactly there, then exactly there. If you got 4 speakers overhead in a line or 5 speakers overhead, versus when you've only got the 2 overhead, you're kind of like, okay, kind of mushes its way. It was generally in front and then it was generally behind, and I didn't get a really clear, distinct, it came from exactly there, then exactly there, then exactly there. Now, that isn't hearing more audio objects. It isn't hearing a greater number. It isn't hearing sounds that somehow disappeared when you were using 4 overheads and reappeared when you were using 6 or 8 or 10 or something like that. But I think they're talking about, in incorrect words, the ability to precisely point at where the sound came from. So I'm giving some benefit of the doubt there, and I think it was just misspeaking in the exact words that were used.
I think it's wrong all the way around. Idea. I'll be honest with you. I think it's wrong all the way around. I don't think that your human ears can better pinpoint sounds because there's more speakers up there, because the problem with your human ears is that they are facing the wrong direction.
Indeed.
And I mean, I don't care if the speaker is exactly where the sound is coming from. You're still going to have a hard time pinpointing it because it's behind you and above you.
Yeah,
and
versus
behind your,
in front of you at ear level. Yeah.
So I understand what they're saying. Yeah, what they're saying is, please buy our processors because they're better and they cost more, and we want to keep our jobs. And you know what? If I had the money, I would absolutely consider buying a Trinnov. I wouldn't, but I would consider it, especially if I had a much larger room. Again, if I had the money for it, maybe I would have a larger room. But in my room, I don't need the number of speakers I've got in here. To be honest with you, I'd cut back if I had to redo the whole thing again. So I don't think it's true, but then again, they may be speaking to an audience that has much larger theaters where, trying to get Atmos speakers, where you can actually put, 10 overhead, then suddenly this starts to make a little bit more sense, but it's still not more sounds. The sounds will all be there. Right. Nothing is going to be lost. Nothing will be lost. I cannot express enough how many pitchforks and torches would come out if it was discovered that Denon receivers were just randomly deleting sounds.
Sure.
They won't do it.
But
they will send it to a speaker that can't play it, but they can.
There will be the people who upgrade to a Trinnov and upgrade to, 34 speakers and say, oh, I noticed some of these sounds more than I noticed them in my previous 11 speaker setup. I mean, there's going to be the people who claim that. So, I mean, did they notice it more? Sure. There's a multitude of reasons. There's a multitude of variables that went on that might be the case, but it is not that sounds completely disappeared because you used fewer speakers. So it's a miswording.
Yeah. And lies. The cinema version of Dolby Atmos can have up to 128 tracks, typically 9.1 channels, and up to 118 sound objects. But from analyzing the data on discs and streaming, the home versions typically have one static channel for the LFE, and then 11 to 15 sound objects total. So how do they downmix all of the cinema sounds into the home mix? So Dolby has a whole bunch of papers that describe how they do all this stuff. And I think in my article, and I think you read it, about how they take Atmos and downmix it, how it gets downmixed into your bass layers, or what happens to those Atmos sounds and stuff. A lot of things in the Dolby tools are both customizable and automated. So you have the option of pressing a button and having it automatically take all the Atmos sounds or objects and then putting it into the bass layer the way that it thinks it should go. And then you listen to it and you go, nope, I don't like it like that. Let me make these changes.
Yeah.
Or you can make global changes and say, oh, I want everything that's supposed to be in this area of the room to be in this speaker, and everything, that sort of thing. You have these sort of options from the mixer, the mixer standpoint, and we can't. It's too often that we blame the format for the bad experience that we've had.
The decisions like me that with a master made.
Me with Ragnarok could easily look at that and go, Dolby Atmos sucks.
Sure.
Because of the lack of bass, but that was clearly not the fault of the format. It's the fault of how it got mixed in that particular case.
Over on the professional section of Dolby's website, they describe this process. It's a thing that they call spatial audio coding. Everything gets called spatial audio, but this was actually one of the earlier things that was ever called spatial audio coding, and it's exactly what Tom describes. A lot of the process is actually automated, but with the ability to manually change things if the mixer and masterer don't like the end results. And it's basically saying, okay, these sounds are all coming from this direction of the room, so they are going to be mixed down into a single object that now correlates quite closely to one of the standard speaker positions. So it's almost like using objects to represent the old channel-based format, but with the ability to take a single sound out of that and using those additional sound objects that are available in the format, move that in a way that just channel-based mixing didn't make so easy. So yeah, it's a semi-automated with manual option process that's called spatial audio coding. And again, none of the sounds disappear, it's just being encoded slightly differently.
Right. Jack has 4 subwoofers. He has them connected to a mini DSP 2x4 HD, which is fed by a single subwoofer output from his Marantz SR6014. He used a multi-sub optimizer software to create a flat, uniform frequency response across his 3-seat couch, which is his only row of seats. That flat uniform response is without the AV receiver in the signal chain, just feeding test tones directly into the mini DSP via Room EQ Wizard and measuring with the UMIC 1. So he's got
some diagrams I'll describe here. He started out by measuring just at the main listening position the native response he was getting from the 4 subwoofers, and there's a 5th line here representing his center speaker. But we can see that actually the overall shape is not that different, at least at the main listening position. But there are some differences between each of the 4 subwoofers measured individually at the main listening position. And then if we had the measurements that were taken at the other seats of his couch, those might be significantly different from these. We're not sure at this point. This is just pointing out that the 4 different subwoofers had 4 different responses at the main listening position. But then he did everything with the multi-sub optimizer software, and we now see a graph which is taken at the 3 separate seats. So all 4 subwoofers are playing here. This is a measurement at each of the 3 different seats for the 3 different lines that are shown in this graph, and they darn near overlap each other. This is really nice uniform response across his 3-seat couch. Very, very uniform, and pretty darn close to linear. This is prior to Odyssey having been run whatsoever, so he's getting linear uniform response, an excellent starting point for Odyssey to come in and do its thing, because wherever you place the microphone, it's going to measure very similar bass response. So it then says, oh, I can go ahead and boost and cut according to my target curve without worrying that I'm going to make one seat worse while I make another seat better. All seats are going to respond very, very similarly thanks to this uniform response across his 3 seats.
Okay. Yes. Let me scroll down because I was not paying attention to that. So after achieving uniform flat response from all 4 subs across all 3 seats, he ran Odyssey. Using the default Odyssey target curve and no dynamic EQ, the bass response remained very flat. He decided he prefers more bass, something closer to the Harman target curve with 6 to 10 dB rising response in the bass, so he dug into the Odyssey editor app and made his preferred target curve. But now he's wondering if his entire approach was a bit of a mistake. In order to get the uniform flat response using just the mini DSP, and prior to running Odyssey, the natural in-room response of all 4 subs was cut down, but now he's boosting it back up via Odyssey. Does it really make sense to cut down some frequencies first, only to boost them back up again? Or should he have set the multi-sub optimizer software to target something closer to the natural response of the subs in his room? Go for uniformity across all 3 seats? Yes, but with a frequency response and curve that's closer to their natural response rather than going for uniform and flat. Those are 2 ways to achieve basically the same thing, I think,
right,
in my mind. And I think the way that you have done it is the better way to do it. And the reason is because you use the mini DSP to get everything so that Odyssey can basically do whatever you want it to do. Right. So the mini DSP is very labor intensive in my mind. You got to go through and do a bunch of stuff with Room EQ Wizard and changing the UMIC 1's position and everything else. Now that you've done all that and you've got it uniform, then Odyssey can go, all right, let me flatten this out, get everything nice and flat. And that's one of the things, and I didn't talk about this earlier, when I was in Clint's room is very bass heavy. Like the volume level was like at least 10 dB lower than I wanted it to be. Like overall, but the bass was right where I wanted it to be. So like compared to the treble in the mid range, the bass was much louder, and I was like, that's interesting. That's interesting choice that he has made to have it calibrated in that way. Or maybe that's just the seat I was sitting in, because he has multiple seats and rows in his room. His riser isn't high enough either. We talked about it, and he knows it. So he's I'm not like backstabbing them over here. His riser needs to be higher because my son's head was in the way and it was driving me nuts. But it was interesting. So, but this is exactly what we want to be able to do. And I know I wrote an article about this. I don't know if I published it yet, but the whole idea of getting this, using the mini DSP and Room EQ Wizard to get yourself that uniform response allows you to go into Odyssey and just tweak it to your heart's content. And yes, you boost and cut frequencies, mostly cut frequencies, and now you're going to boost them back up. Well, that's where your headroom comes in. In your subwoofers and in your amplifiers and everything else. That's where your headroom comes in. That gives you the ability to go, okay, now that I've got everything where I want it to be, I want it to be flat. now that I've got it flat and uniform across all 3 or 4 of my seats, now I can do that taste test and say, okay, because that's what I'm actually thinking about right now. After being in Clint's room, I'm like, do I want more bass? I think I want more bass. I think I might want to do that. But, in my room, I have gotten so used to very, very uniform bass that and very flat across the entire frequency range that I have forgotten sort of that my subwoofers can, in fact, shake every single stud in this
yeah, the real important thing to focus on with the multi-sub optimizer is uniformity. So for example, if this question were asked in a different way and you was saying, okay, I used multi-sub optimizer, I was able to achieve very uniform response across my 3 seats, but no matter what I did, it didn't quite come out linear. I would say don't worry about that. What's important is uniformity, because as long as it's uniform, Odyssey can come in and do its thing because it's not making one seat worse while it makes one better. But if you achieve linearity and uniformity, I'm not going to tell you that you made any mistake. And in particular, it has one potential benefit when you do run Odyssey, which is that he also include a waterfall graph, which is one of the nicest looking low bass response waterfall graphs I've ever seen. Like, this thing has no ringing going on. I mean, yes, down at below 20 hertz, the room starts to resonate, but everywhere above, he's got really controlled short and even decay times. And one advantage there is when Odyssey is now doing its measurements, it's not going to run into a scenario where it was getting like a time domain resonance that it's going to attempt to correct. When you're measuring this very linear uniform response in the time domain and the frequency domain across all of your seats, Odyssey is going to be able to have a field day with that. So I think you've actually done exactly like Tom said, the sort of the ideal, and I definitely don't think you have anything to worry about or to go ahead and change. It's not that your subwoofer, because the original signal got toned down at certain places by the mini DSP and then boosted back up again by your Odyssey target curve. It's not as though your subwoofer is going to run out of headroom, because as far as it's concerned, it's receiving a weaker signal from the mini DSP than the native signal would have been, but then it was boosted back up by Odyssey's signal. So the subwoofer is still responding to the signal with its native response. That's what the subwoofer is responding to. You didn't lose headroom from it. What you did was you lowered the signal with the mini DSP and then brought it back up again with Odyssey, which, it seems a bit redundant, but for the process to work really, really well, you've done it right. So don't worry. You've done really well. You don't have to do it again, and you've got, I'm sure, fantastic results.
Yeah. How long have we been going here? I know we started late.
Yeah, we should have about 20 minutes left.
Dan is going to be installing a home theater in the open concept room in the basement. The total space is about 800 square feet, about 6,400 cubic feet. The theater area will be over to one side, so we'll have one side wall, but be open to the kitchen on the other side. This is a basement. It's got a kitchen in the basement. Okay, whatever. Yep. So obviously there's no wall on one side to mount the surround speaker, and he really doesn't want a speaker stand just out in the open. He figures the best and easiest solution is to mount the surround speakers on his back wall, but that won't be within Dolby speaker placement guidelines. So is there a way to label them as surround backs but no surround speakers present, or is there a better solution for all of this? No. You can't.
Yeah, they don't allow you to say I have no surround speakers, but I do have surround backs. To have surround backs, you must have said that yes, I have surround speakers. So that isn't an option. One
thing that drives me absolutely nuts is the idea that you're now that Dolby has changed their mind and your surround speakers need to be to your sides. It's like impossible to have them behind you, and then it'll sound terrible. It sounded really good for like a lot of years, that when we had our surround speakers behind us, when the 5.1 was the best that we had. And it was just fine for everybody until Dolby changed their minds and decided to add surround backs.
I mean, to be fair, the surround speakers were always on the side walls in Dolby's things. It's just hardly anybody ever looked at the guidelines because everybody just said, hey, these are the back speakers, and they threw them in the rear corners of their room. So
it's going to sound fine, I think, basically, is the takeaway. For my takeaway is, if this is where you can put them, you should definitely put them there.
Absolutely.
And then tell Dolby to stuff it, because this is as good as it's going to get.
I would say try to put those surround speakers. They will be labeled as your surround speakers. You will connect them to the surround binding posts on your AV receiver, but you will physically put them on your back wall because we've got to live in the real world, and physically this is where it makes sense to put your surround speakers in this room. But try to put them as wide apart as you're able to, right? That's going to get you closer to the ideal angle, options that are there, but you're going to be outside of those. That is fine. Don't worry about it too much. Will there be the occasional sound if you're like looking at a test pattern signal with the angles mentioned on the screen where it's like, okay, if I measure it with my protractor, it doesn't perfectly line up, of course, but no, we got to live in the real world. This is fine. The only other option I would say is maybe you end up with surround speakers that are in ceilings, right? A lot of people do that. And is that the ideal placement? No. Also no. They aren't supposed to be elevated quite that much. But if you're worried about it, or you just really want to have surround backs and surrounds, then in-ceiling surround speakers is a perfectly reasonable compromise solution, or something like hanging prime elevation speakers on your ceiling, with their angles that are coming down. Again, it's not exactly within the Dolby guidelines for the elevation angles of your surround speakers, but it's a reasonable compromise. So any of those options, but honestly, if you want to stick with 5 and just mount them on the back wall, we're A-okay with that. It's not perfect, but it's completely reasonable.
What that movie is this? Jay says No Escape, in 1994, is coming to Ultra HD Blu-ray this month. So No Escape is a movie that was made or released in 1994.
That's right.
I was trying to figure out what it was. Anyways, it's got Ray Liotta in it. I know that
it does.
Because I can read that. But I don't think I ever saw this movie. I don't know. Maybe it seems like a kind of movie I would have seen. I don't know. I don't recognize it. Anyways, the German release includes the English soundtrack in both Dolby Atmos and 13.1 channel Oro 3D. Since we, especially me, Tom, are such huge fans of Oro 3D, we thought we might be interested. But in all seriousness, some of our listeners are genuinely interested in Oro 3D. He's curious himself, and this seems like an opportunity to compare different immersive audio formats. There's no word yet if a North American release will include the Oro 3D version of the format.
Probably not.
So might it be worth it to import this German version? What do we think? I think just let it go. I think as somebody who owned who owned HD DVDs, right? Is that what they were called?
As me, I had HD DVDs, a whole bunch of them.
I had them. I watched a couple of them. The player lived in my system for a long, long time, but unused until I finally took it out. And then I put it into literally my bedroom, lying on its side, cocked up against my dresser with the discs. All the discs I had, I actually went to a Blockbuster that was closing and bought out every HD DVD they had, one copy of every one that they had, so that I had all the available movies. Never watched a single one of them, and eventually gave it to Salvation Army. So do I think you should import a German version of this movie for Oro 3D? No, I do not. Because you might watch it once and it's going to be a huge waste.
It's your money if it's no skin off your back that, paying some extra to import it. I mean, that's fine. Ultra HD Blu-rays are region free, so it's going to play just fine in your Ultra HD Blu-ray player here, bringing it in from Germany. So if it's just a curiosity and you want to give it a try, I have no beef with that. Obviously, you're paying a bit extra, but it's your money. You can do as you please. But if the idea was I want to compare Dolby Atmos to Oro 3D, you can't just compare the container. You can't just compare the format. You're comparing whatever the relative mixers and masterers of the Dolby Atmos version decided to do with the soundtrack versus the mixers and masterers who did the Oro 3D version. There are human decisions involved in here. You're not comparing technical formats with each other. You're comparing artistic decisions done by mixing and mastering engineers. So is this any way to say, oh, Oro 3D sounds better in this way than Dolby Atmos? Absolutely not. There's all the human decisions that went into what you're hearing. So, as a curiosity, knock yourself out if the money's no problem to you. But if you're thinking that this is some sort of way to technically analyze the difference between immersive audio formats, absolutely not. Artistic decisions are involved.
I will say I just read the summary of this thing, and it sounds like it was written by like a 6th grader for a project at school. There's the outsiders versus the insiders. There's an ultimate weapon. It just sounds
If we
dumb.
hustle, I'm hoping we can get to both our last questions here. So
We'll
let's
see.
try.
Bertrand. A couple of weeks ago, Bertrand wrote us after having installed his DIY corner traps and finding that, after having run Odyssey, he now thinks the sound in his room is a bit bright compared to how it sounded before installing the corner bass traps. But he had also repositioned some of his Martin Logan Motion series speakers and now realizes he had made one other change as well. He actually turned everything off. Normally, he has his ventilation turned on whenever he's in his home theater, but when he installed the corner bass traps and ran Odyssey, he had the ventilation shut off. Would that have had an effect on the Odyssey calibration and potentially contributed to the results? I don't know how loud your ventilation thingy whatever is. So, I mean, any sort of background noise can affect the results, which is why I always run them more than, like, I don't always, but if I run them and if, like, there was a truck going beep, beep, beep outside, I run it again. Or my kids are yelling in the other room or something like that. Or, I mean, I am a little neurotic about it. I'm like, if I'm going to run it, I'm going to run it right. I've also started to rerun it again if I think, because I run it from outside the room. So if I start it and then I think it's done and I open the door while it's still in progress and the bass boop, 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 boop is going on.
Right.
When I open the door, I'm like, that's it. Ruined it. Got to start over again. So
that might be worth $200 for Multi-Q X just so you can run that single measurement again instead of the entire process. But I think he was maybe wondering if like the air pressure in the room, would have made a big difference because the ventilation was on or off. I mean, here's the thing. If you run Odyssey again, there's going to be enough other variables that there's no way you're going to be able to tell whether it was the ventilation pressurization or that the louvers were open versus closed. Like, we're never going to be able to tell if that was the variable that made the difference. So here's the thing. If you are not really satisfied with the way things are sounding right now, adjust the target curve in the Odyssey Editor app and run Odyssey again. Absolutely. And yes, keep the conditions close to the way that you're actually going to use the theater. But yeah, it's a little bit too hard to say that this is the one variable that was responsible. It's going to be potentially a small variable in the noise floor and perhaps in the air pressure of the room. I wouldn't really put too much stock into that last part. But running it again, you're not going to be able to say that was exactly the variable that caused all of this.
All right. He recently watched Day Shift on Netflix, which is that movie I watched the first really actually quite good fight scene of, and then my wife came in the room and I never restarted it.
Jamie Foxx
Jamie
stars
Foxx
in that.
He was using his Apple TV 4K. The movie is available in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, but he quickly noticed he was only getting 1080p and SDR. He did some Googling and found out that his Marantz receiver's video settings were the culprit. Somehow video conversion and dual HDMI output had turned themselves on, even though he had manually turned them off before. Could an automatic firmware update have done that? Why would his receiver's video output settings have changed on him? He set them back to the way he had them before, and 4K and Dolby Vision worked just fine. Gremlins. I don't know.
Could have been. I know that Bertrand's done quite a bit of tinkering with his system and maybe done a reset here or there. So certainly if you'd done a factory reset, that would have changed for sure. Firmware update, that part, I mean, I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility. So I'm not going to say that absolutely wasn't that way. To me, this was probably that you did a reset at some point and just didn't realize that was a setting that had changed on you and you had to put back. But, I mean, hey, you found it, so yes, making sure that the video output settings in your AV receiver, that is another variable in the signal chain, and we basically just want all of that stuff turned off so that the signal's going through the AV receiver untouched as far as the video side of things is concerned.
All right. As mentioned, Day Shift is also in Dolby Atmos, but he noticed that throughout the movie there were no sounds at all coming from his surround back speakers. He said Apple TV 4K because that sounds very much like an Xbox thing. So he went to try using either Dolby Surround or DTS Neural X upmixing, but neither was available. That's because it's in Atmos. You can't upmix something that's already there. He thought that even though if the content is available in Atmos, don't you still have the option of using an upmixer instead? Why was he forced to use Atmos in this case? And was the lack of any sounds coming from his surround backs due to this receiver thinking it already had surround back channels from the Atmos soundtrack, but those channels just didn't have anything playing in them? You can't use an upmixer on Atmos.
Not when the receiver recognizes the Atmos bitstream as Atmos. Now, when you're playing an Ultra HD Blu-ray, you'll have the option of applying the upmixers even when it's an Atmos soundtrack because it's based on a Dolby True HD 7.1 audio track to begin with additional metadata on top of it that turns it into Atmos. So you'll have the option there with a physical Ultra HD Blu-ray of switching between the Atmos soundtrack and upmixing it, where it'll say, okay, I'm taking the Dolby True HD track of this, ignoring the Atmos metadata, and applying an upmixer to the Dolby True HD version of it. But when it's coming through an Apple TV 4K, the Apple TV 4K actually does all decoding of audio internally and outputs PCM audio. So what's coming out of the Apple TV 4K is PCM audio in what's called the Dolby MAT format, the Dolby Metadata Enhanced Audio Transmission. And so there is no like Dolby True HD or Dolby Digital Plus for the decoder in your AV receiver to lock onto first and then optionally apply Atmos metadata. It's just coming as PCM with Atmos attached to it. That's what's coming out of that Apple TV 4K, so you don't get the option to upmix that. You could dig into the Apple TV 4K's audio settings and force it to output just vanilla Dolby Digital 5.1 or vanilla DTS 5.1, but then of course you're losing some of the, it's not lossless when it's coming out from a streaming service anyway. But there would be a little bit of a downgrade in the technical side of things as far as it being on the lossy side of things and putting it into a Dolby Digital 5.1 container. But that's what you'd have to do with an Apple TV 4K because of the way that it handles Atmos as a PCM soundtrack.
Okay. Yeah, and yes. Greg. A little over 4 years ago, Greg bought a JVC RS540, the same as the X790 from AV Science. That model was recently discontinued at the time, and as the next series had been released. His model still used a native 1080p panel with eShift for 4K content, and HDMI 2.0 with the support for HDR, but no frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. Mm-hmm. He's using it with a 110-inch silver ticket screen with his two front seats about 9.5 feet away for a 45-degree field of view, and his back row of seats, 4 seats on a riser and close to the back wall, about 6 feet behind the front row. The riser is built in, and they're a family of 5, so they really do use that back row all the time. Yep. And he's got surround back speakers. I can't tell.
Yes, he does.
He does. It's the only display in the room, and it's the main screen in the house used by the whole family, so the hours get racked up quite quickly, and he has replaced the bulb twice now. The first time was after about 3,000 hours. He knows the image was starting to dim, but the budget for things in the home theater was a bit tight, so feeling adventurous, he bought a bare bulb off a forum member, swapped out just the bulb while keeping the housing from his original, and thankfully that worked perfectly fine, no issues at all. But now it's been another 3,000 hours, and he has more money than time this go around, so he bought a complete bulb and housing from Pure Land AV, refurbished, and was happy with how quick and easy it was to swap out the lamp. However, after about 20 minutes of use, the image went mostly purple. It seemed the green part of the signal was completely missing, and while resetting the projector briefly got the image looking normal again, every 10 to 20 minutes, the green part of the signal would cut out again. So we got a replacement lamp from Pure AV, but ultimately ended up returning that too, since the same problem happened again. Pure Land's customer service was great, by the way. He still recommends them. He went back to his old dimming bulb, and it had no issues at all. So he bit the bullet and paid full price for a replacement lamp directly from JVC, but to his dismay, it too had the weird cutting out of the green part of the signal every 10 to 20 minutes or so. But going back to his original lamp housing, once again, that worked perfectly. He contacted JVC, of course he is out of warranty, and they said it might be either a loose ribbon cable or a failing image processing board, but there's no way to know without shipping it in for an official repair, and they went $200 just to look at it. He hates the thought of paying hundreds of dollars for someone to plug in a loose cable, and if it turns out it's a failing image processing board, JVC that would cost about $2,000, so it might be worthwhile just to get an entirely new projector. So I'd like to ask us, what do we think he should do? Should he try to take his projector apart himself to look for his potentially loose ribbon cable? Should he try to find a local repair shop, even if they aren't officially authorized by JVC? Should he go ahead and just pay the $200 and the shipping costs and send it to the official repair shop? Or should he assume this might end up being a $2,000 plus repair and just declare that it is now time for an entirely new display? The thing is, the newer JVC models are just too expensive for the budget he set aside for home theater. He can stick with the currently working dimming bulb for a while longer, but something is going to need to be done fairly soon. So does he switch over to, say, an Epson 5050 UB? Or since he does use an Xbox Series X, does he entertain the idea of switching to a large flat panel? He's hoping to wait a few more years for prices to come down further, maybe get an 83 or 97-inch OLED at that point. But if he's buying now, he'll be looking to keep the cost closer to what the Epson 5050 UB costs, about $3,000 or less. So maybe a 85-inch QLED. He can move his front seats closer to maintain a similar field of view, but moving the back row forward would be awkward since the riser at the back is built in. So overall, what do we think he should do here? I think if the problem is something that you can fix, it is at the connection point from the housing to the projector. So
it sure seems like it seems that the old housing works fine, because it always has, right? Like if removing the old housing at one point, putting in the new unit, you got this weird purplish problem, and then you put the old housing back in and you still had it, I'd be like, okay, so ribbon cable has come loose. That's almost certainly what happened when you were doing the swap out. But the fact that you can put in the new unit, it gets this weird purplish problem, but then you put the old housing with the old dimming bulb that you already replaced the bare bulb in once, and that works perfectly fine. I'm like, there's something weird has happened with the housing, which maybe there was like a running order change in the manufacturing that just like a millimeter out of spec or whatever it was, but it's just enough that some little connection between the housing connector and the connector inside the projector that the housing plugs into, that like one of those channels just isn't making good contact. Because he's like, also, this works for like 10 or 20 minutes. It's fine. And then obviously the heat is building up, so something's expanding in there and that connection is coming loose, but the old housing didn't have this problem. So I'm almost like, hey, is the simplest and easiest, a little bit time consuming and a little bit hassle solution, but definitely cheaper than sending this in and maybe having a $2,000 repair for a board that I don't actually think needs to be replaced based on what you've described, is you get the refurbished bulb from Pure Land AV, but then you remove the bare bulb from the new housing and put the bare bulb into the old housing, which is a process you've already done once before, aside from having to remove the bare bulb from the thing that you're buying. Because like, there's no easy way for him to buy just the bare bulb anymore. He'd kind of have to buy the whole bulb and housing. That's the scenario that he's run into with this little bit older model. But like, you know that you can get the bulb and housing, so then you just go in there and remove the bulb. That's my thought. Put some time into it rather than money.
Right. I would be looking at the housing and the connection that the housing makes to the projector and look for a slightly bent pin. Or maybe, because I'm wondering if that's, if that's where your issue lies. Like Rob said, it's heating up and something is moving because of that heat or bending because of that heat. But yes, I don't disagree with Rob, but I think that solution is one that's destined to fail eventually.
Okay.
Because whatever's happening with that housing, with other housing, is, if it is unless it is a change in how the housings were built later on, which seems unlikely because it should be the same spec, there is something with the housing that you're currently using that has already damaged or is in some way damaging your projector.
Maybe the original housing that he's had this whole time and the plug that it plugs into inside of the projector, like maybe something bent together.
Yes, that's exactly what I think. So if you think about your favorite chair, right? So you sit in a chair for like 20, or maybe your dad's favorite chair or something like that, for 20 years. And when anybody else sits in it, they're like, this doesn't fit. This doesn't seem right.
Right.
This doesn't fit
the
right.
The cushion has conformed to the butt that has been sitting in it for a while.
I think that's what's happened to your projector housing and bulb. The housing and the projector itself. So the real solution is to fix that so that you can know that your projector will be fine going forward, because whatever's happening there, I think, is going to eventually just break.
Yeah.
So if you can find the pin that's bent or the part of the cable that's damaged right there, that's fine. If you can change the bulb like Rob's saying, If you can do that and it works for another year or two,
right,
then that's giving you time for prices to come down.
Yeah.
But you still are risking it just lasting another week, another day,
right,
or another year. You don't know. So you're risking that in order to not have to, in hopes that you'll have time for more prices to come down.
Yeah. Now, in the scenario that you decide, you know what, I just don't have the time to deal with any of this, and maybe I just go for a flat panel, because I just want to address the idea that, hey, maybe you do go for a flat panel. So there are those 85-inch QN90A from Samsung. That there's still a few of them floating out there at the 85-inch size for $2,500. So that's, obviously a big size decrease from 110 to 85. It looks like it wouldn't be too hard to nudge all of your seats forward a little bit. I'm talking maybe 6 inches to a foot, not a tremendous amount. And then if you put that new 85-inch television on a stand, right? You don't wall mount it, you put it on a stand. Maybe you get one of the 3-in-1 style mounts, or you get, the universal stand that you can put underneath any TV, just regular TV equipment stand. But what I'm talking about is bring the display closer to you, away from the front wall. That is certainly something you can do with a flat panel. Then, that's how I would come at that. Trying to get to like the 97 or the 98-inch screen size, that is very expensive. Definitely over the sort of $3,000-ish budget that you're talking about. Did also want to mention that the brand new QN90B, that has, of course, replaced the QN90A in Samsung's lineup, already has come down to about $3,500. So, it's $1,000 more expensive than the outgoing QN90A, but it's already come down well from the $5,000 MSRP that it came out as. They've already put big discounts on that QN90B series. So, given that the 83-inch OLEDs, you're definitely looking at $4,000 plus. 83-inch OLED at $4,000, which is still doable with the C ones, the LG C ones, is like, it's pretty tempting. And you put that on a stand, you nudge your seats a little closer, you bring the TV away from the front wall using a TV stand. That's all potentially doable for about $1,000 over your proposed budget. But those QLEDs from Samsung, go for the flagship 4K, go for the QN90 series, whether it's the A or B if you do that. But I would certainly be pretty darn happy with that. And coming from a projector to a QLED, it's still going to be like, the HDR has definitely never looked that bright. And the black levels are really good on the full array local dimming QN90 series from Samsung. So I don't think you'd be super disappointed just with the image quality. So if you go that route, those are my recommendations there. But I think this is something that can sort of be worked around or fixed without having to do a huge expensive repair on the entire projector.
Yeah, and lastly, your question about whether or not to take it to a local repair shop. Mm-hmm. I would do some investigation myself first and see if I can figure out what exactly is going on, because
I wouldn't disassemble the whole chassis and go hunting for this ribbon cable. No. I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Yeah, I would just do. I think it's got to happen. It's got to be right there with the connection with the housing.
Yep.
I cannot believe it's anywhere else. So that's what I would look at.
And when we're saying that maybe the housing and the connection inside the projector bent a little bit, like, we're not talking much, because like we say, it's not as though the new bulbs have like functioned zero, right?
Yeah.
In fact, they function fine for like 10 to 20 minutes until we're pretty sure that's a heat related thing that's going on. So it's just like there's a little bend in like one little pin, probably. That's right. We suspect what's going on there.
Right. All right. That's the end of that. So we want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Julian for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 137 patrons over at patreon.com, including Bertrand.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Julian, very much for the PayPal donation, and big thanks to our 137 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast, which is where you go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. Bertrand, thank you for being one of those 137 patrons.
We want to thank Julian for talking us up to AV Science, Greg for taking Rob out to dinner, and Jack and Greg for sending photos with permission for me to use them on AV Gadgets.
Yeah, thank you, Julian, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Jack and Greg, for giving Tom permission to use those photos on avgadgets.com.
Lastly, we want to thank those who have thanked us for keeping the podcast going during this I mean, I don't
Trying
know
time, let's
I don't
just
even
say.
know if it. I don't even know. Are there non-trying times? Are we ever going to get
know.
back to that? I don't know. Julian, Karl, Jack, BJ, Clara, Jorge, Infinite Gary, Gurinder, Jonathan, Ilango, Kris, Nathan, Greg, and Bertrand. Thank you for thanking us.
Yeah, that's quite a list, but it was very nice. Like I say, a lot of those messages for Tom throughout that whole hurricane situation were very, very kind of very nice. I'll forward those all on to you if you need to see them again, Tom, in case they got lost in the shuffle of all the emails. But a thank you to Julian, Karl, Jack, BJ, Clara, Jorge, Infinite Gary, Gurinder, Jonathan, Ilango, Kris, Nathan, Greg, and Bertrand. And you know what? I probably missed some that came in on Twitter and stuff like that too. So certainly not intentionally leaving anybody out. Thank you to everybody for the continued support. It really, really is nice to have that encouragement. So a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
All right. If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.